This is Garis, masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 501, entitled Feminists Need to Realize They No Longer Have a Monopoly over Gender Politics. Description. Now that the COVID crisis seems to be nearly over, students will be returning to campuses in their millions. So the time is now ripe for well-informed masculists, well-armed with masculist ideas and rhetoric, to confront the monoconscious feminists, telling them that feminists do not have a monopoly over gender politics, that women also oppress men, and in fact that women oppress men far worse than vice versa, given women's decades-lasting man-slaving parasitism of men. We can expect in the coming few years millions of verbally vicious arguments between monoconscious feminists and biconscious masculists, who will see these monoconscious feminists as MFBs, in brackets, monoconscious feminazi bigots, and hence will bite their fucking heads off, telling these women in no uncertain terms that gender oppression is definitely a two-way street. Flyer itself. Feminists need to realise they no longer have a monopoly over gender politics. By Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. As I write this in March of 2022, countries are opening up after the COVID crisis, and university students are starting to go back to their campuses. This means that it will be possible again for people, university types, to have meetings, discussion groups and the like, which will soon give the masculists the opportunity to spread their masculist ideas to the university public, which is where most new ideas get off the ground. So pretty soon we can expect there to be large numbers of rather bitter, emotional and ideological clashes between monoconscious feminists and biconscious masculists. So the time is ripe for masculists to really spread their ideas to men, so that a much greater number of men are intellectually armed to be able to withstand and overcome the attacks of the monoconscious feminists against them. A well-armed masculist is positioned to defeat such monoconscious feminists due to the superior strength of their masculist arguments and the inherent genetic superiorities of their sex, namely their superior average intelligence and their much greater levels of testosterone in their blood. So it can be hugely more explosively, verbally violent, with monoconscious feminists truly scaring them. One of the main lessons these biconscious masculists need to teach these monoconscious feminists is that feminists are monoconscious. That is, they have had only their feminist consciousness raised, since that is all they have heard in the way of gender politics all their lives over the past 6 decades. A monoconscious feminist is usually rather feminazi bitchy because she is angry at men for the ways that men oppress women, which is what feminism teaches her. The more objective these feminist claims, the angrier these monoconscious feminists become, to the point of claiming that men are rapists, men are toxic, etc., making themselves utterly repulsive to men. So pay a heavy price of not having a man in their lives due to their misandry, their callousness towards men. So a well-intellectually armed masculist who has bothered to become well-informed with masculist ideas can quickly make the point to such a woman that in fact gender oppression is a two-way street. That is, that women oppress men too, especially with their decades-lasting man-slavery of men, by not bothering to FIP up, in brackets. A FIP is a masculist term for a financially independent person, close brackets, by not bothering to get a career-competent education at high school and college. Then expect some gullible, stupid, man-slavable man to work for her for decades of his life, thus manslaving him for decades, a huge gender crime against a man that the masculists will eventually kill such women for, since the masculists, fluffydom, in brackets, a fluffy, based on the word fluff, is a masculist label for a traditional woman who expects to be able to parasite off the money and labour of a man, having a deeply ingrained attitude that most women have that, quote,
men exist on this earth to pay for women to have babies,
end quote. Close brackets, is manslavery, and manslavery is slavery, and hence hated, and hence a war issue. Masculists are at war against fluffies and against the even more hated fluffy feminist hypocrite genociders, aiming to wipe them out slowly by punishing them severely, by totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them, forcing them to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless and spat at, for being immoral, parasitic, man-slaving vermin, to be wiped out, to have their monoconscious feminazi genes removed from the gene pool. Millions of men need to be aware of the major masculist arguments so that they can overcome the arguments of the monoconscious feminists. The core idea of the masculists is that it is a rebellion by men against being man-slaves to women, working for women for decades of their lives. Masculists have the following very powerful moral argument that they need to teach everyone of both sexes, of all ages, and that it is that it was men who liberated women from household drudgery by giving women the male-invented contraceptive pill, science-based medicine, household gadgets, higher education, etc. Women now have a life expectancy of 85 years. So even those women who stay at home for a few years while their children are very small still have a career window of half a century, so women can work. The masculists now stand up, pointing the finger at women, saying, quote, now that you women can work, you must work, since anything else is manslavery, and manslavery will get you killed. End quote. Masculists see a close historical analogy between the Negro slavery that was the root cause of the US Civil War and the man-slavery of today, with several billion men still being man-slaved by women. Masculists estimate that about 80% of young women at the critical age of 16 choose to become fluffy crappers, choosing to study fluffy crap majors that the economy does not value, so that they end up as fluffies as adults with a fluffy crap diploma that disables them from earning a decent salary. So after screwing around in their 20s with dozens of penises in them, causing them to no longer be able to emotionally bond with a man, they turn around in their 30s, when their biological clock is ticking hard, and look for some gullible, man-slavable man to work for her, so that she lives off the labour of her man-slave, whom she rewards from time to time with a bit of sex, whose quality usually goes down over time. Masculists have a hatred of such women for their decades-lasting man-slaving parasitism. Masculists see that the fipping of women, that is, the creation of a FIP society, in which both sexes are socialised and educated to be FIPs, will go a long way to solving most of men's gender issues, especially in the divorce courts, which have been taken over by the even more hated fluffy feminists in all their hypocrisy and genocide. Masculists see fluffy feminists as hypocrites because the monoconscious feminists want equal rights with men in the parliaments, but reject equal obligations with men to share equally the burden of earning the living by bothering to fip up and pulling their financial weight equally with men. Masculists see fluffy feminists who control the divorce courts also as genociders, since they have made divorce so toxic for men that in many countries now 2/3 and rising of young men refuse to marry and reject paternity, since they are so hateful of what the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts are doing to one father in 4. That is, stripping custody of his kids away from him with a 90% probability, forcing him to give his house to his ex-wife so that she can raise her kids in it. He will lose half his stuff and half his wealth to her. He will be forced to make child payments to his kids, whom he will barely see. And if his ex-wife is a real fluffy, he may be forced to pay her alimony for the rest of his life, with no moral nor legal obligation on her to get off her fat parasitic ass and fip up. So she remains a parasite of him after the divorce, the way she was before the divorce. The fluffy feminists who control the divorce courts are indirect genociders, since they cause the majority of young men to wipe their hands of marriage and paternity, which is crashing the birth rate. Millions of young men are telling themselves, quote, "Fuck marriage, fuck paternity. I'm not going to face a 1 in 4 chance of being financially massacred in a fluffy feminist-dominated divorce court system. I might continue to fuck women, but I certainly won't marry them, nor give them kids, because marriage is now toxic for men, because divorce is toxic for men." Everyone knows that the divorce rate in many countries is now about half, and about half of those divorces, the ex-wife turns into a vindictive feminazi bitch, out to extract the maximum amount of resources that she can from her ex-husband. Thus, masculists are murderously angry and hateful at what is happening to men in the divorce courts, so want a slew of legal changes to occur in society so that the above kind of legal butchery does not occur. Masculists want the that's paternity rejection right, legislated, so that men are given the same right to reject an unwanted pregnancy as women have, who already have the maternity rejection right, aka the abortion right. So women have a legislated right to reject an unwanted pregnancy, but men don't, which is the most blatant form of sexual discrimination that exists, and it's not against women, but against men. This is the end of part 1.